the quiet war of the soul. There is a kind of suffering that hides in plain sight, the slow unraveling of a soul tethered to someone who pretended to love it. To the outside world, everything looks polished. Smiles are exchanged, polite words are spoken. But inside, something sacred is being hollowed out. To suffer under the hands of a narcissist is not merely to endure manipulation. It is to be made to doubt your very reality, to feel that somehow, somewhere, you must be the problem, that maybe, just maybe, you are not worthy of peace, not deserving of kindness, not capable of being truly seen. But let me tell you this, friend. The narcissist did not choose you because you were weak. They chose you because you were strong, radiant, and full of light. You had something they could not fabricate, a real, beating heart capable of love, truth, and faith. And in their starvation for meaning, they sought to possess and diminish you. This message is not about revenge. It is about something much holier, restoration. It is about learning how to overcome the shadow without becoming shadow yourself. These 5 tactics are not weapons of war, but tools of clarity. They are ways of reclaiming what was stolen, not with rage, but with resolve. Not with venom, but with vision. You do not need to dirty your hands to defeat evil. You only need to walk in truth long enough for the lie to unravel itself. So let us begin. 1. The power of sacred indifference, when you finally stop bleeding for someone who was never hurt. There is a kind of silence that is not born from defeat, but from revelation. The moment you realize that the more you try to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, the more you lose pieces of your soul. For those who have loved a narcissist, indifference does not arrive overnight. It comes slowly, like the dawn after a long, harrowing night. It comes after you've wept prayers into your pillow, after you've tried to make peace in a battlefield that never should have been yours, and after you've poured out forgiveness like oil, only to have it used as fuel for further abuse. You gave everything you had, your loyalty, your patience, your tenderness, and it was never enough. They didn't just drain your energy, they fed off your reactions. They studied your pain and turned it into strategy. Each time you raised your voice in self-defense, they smirked. Each time you cried, they grew stronger. They mistook your love for naivety and your mercy for weakness. But even the softest hearts have limits, and eventually the soul grows tired of bleeding for someone who was never wounded to begin with. That is where sacred indifference is born, not out of resentment, but out of awakening. It is the quiet decision to stop handing your dignity to someone who thrives on your destruction. It is the deeply spiritual moment when you realize that not every storm needs your attention, not every accusation deserves your answer, and not every relationship is worth the price of your peace. Sacred indifference is not coldness, it is clarity. It is what happens when your heart finally catches up to what your mind has long suspected. This person is not just incapable of love. They are allergic to truth. You begin to see things differently. Their insults no longer cut as deep. Their praise no longer intoxicates. Their silence no longer manipulates you into chasing them. You no longer ask why they changed. You no longer feel responsible for their moods. You stop looking for closure from someone who benefits from your confusion, and most importantly, you stop begging for love that you now understand was counterfeit all along. This indifference is sacred because it is not born of bitterness but of rebirth. It is not an escape, it is a return to the you that existed before the gaslighting, before the emotional whiplash, before the constant second-guessing. It is a return to stillness, to dignity, to the presence of God, who watched every moment you suffered in silence and waited patiently for you to stop pleading with man and start listening to him. And here's the deeper truth. Narcissists are not destroyed by your anger. They are destroyed by your silence. Not the kind of silence that seethes, but the kind that heals. When you stop engaging, when you no longer flinch, when you stop performing for their approval, they begin to unravel. Not because you've attacked, but because you've removed what they needed most, your attention. Indifference starves the narcissist in ways that rage never could. They can weaponize your passion. They cannot survive your peace. Imagine standing in front of a tornado and not running, not screaming, not bracing, just standing. You realize that the storm is real, yes, but it no longer belongs to you. You do not have to enter it. You do not have to understand it. You simply have to recognize that you are no longer its captive. This is what sacred indifference feels like. You stop explaining yourself. You stop proving your worth. You stop sacrificing your peace on the altar of someone else's ego. And for the first time in what may be years, you begin to feel the weight of your own soul returning home. The narcissist will notice. They will sense the shift. They will likely escalate, switching from cruelty to charm, from rage to repentance. They may try to re-enter your life disguised as someone who has changed, but your indifference will tell them that the door they once kicked open with ease is now protected by discernment, guarded by peace, and sealed by heaven. You do not need to make an announcement. You do not need to block them out of vengeance. You simply stop giving them access to the most sacred parts of you, your emotions, your energy, your essence. You give them no performance, no drama, no reaction, just a gentle, unwavering refusal to participate. This isn't giving up, it's growing up. It's spiritual maturity. And for many, it is the first taste of freedom after years in emotional captivity. Like the Israelites standing at the edge of the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army behind them and fear closing in, God's instruction was simple. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. Exodus 14:13. Sacred indifference is your Red Sea moment. You don't need to swim. You don't need to shout. You just need to stand. Stand still in the confidence that what used to drown you will soon be behind you. Stand still in the knowledge that you were never meant to carry the burden of someone else's brokenness. Stand still in the holy assurance that the same God who watched you love in vain is now teaching you how to love yourself with wisdom. And once you stand, once you taste the kind of peace that no narcissist can counterfeit, you will begin to feel something new rising in you, a hunger not to retaliate, but to understand, a desire not for revenge, but for revelation, because the deeper your healing goes, the more you will crave truth, not just about who they are, but about who you are without them. That craving for truth is what leads us to the next step, holding up the mirror that exposes what the narcissist has spent their whole life hiding. 2. The mirror of truth, exposing the illusion without raising your voice. There is a moment in every survivor's journey where the fog begins to lift, slowly, then all at once, and you finally see it. You see that the person you once fought so hard to love was not who they pretended to be. You see that the moments of warmth were not evidence of goodness, but tactics in a performance. You see that the love they claimed to give was merely bait, offered with strings you were never meant to notice until you were too entangled to escape. And worst of all, you see that while your love was real, theirs was a rehearsal, a mask they wore to keep you invested. And this revelation hits. It does not come with rage at first. It comes with grief. Grief for all the moments you defended them, for all the years you wasted justifying their abuse, for all the nights you stayed up wondering what you did wrong, only to discover that the person you were trying to reach never truly existed. It is a sorrow so deep it feels like the death of something sacred. Your trust, your innocence, your hope that love could redeem what manipulation had hollowed out. But that grief is also the beginning of clarity, because once you stop begging for a fair fight, you begin to see that the real war was never about logic or fairness. It was about perception. It was about truth. And this brings us to one of the most powerful tools you have in this battle, the mirror of truth. You see, the narcissist spends their life building a fortress of illusion, a carefully curated image of charm, success, spirituality, or victimhood. Their entire identity depends on you believing the lie. They can't survive being seen for who they are, not because they don't know what they are, but because if you know, their power disappears. So when you begin to reflect back the truth with calm, unwavering clarity, without accusation, without venom, it terrifies them, not because you're loud, but because you're accurate. You're no longer playing the role. You're watching the play from the outside, and suddenly you see the strings. You see the script. You see the desperate actor behind the mask. And here's what makes this tactic so powerful. You don't have to shout. You don't have to insult. You don't have to convince. You simply become a mirror that reflects patterns, not emotions, a mirror that says with gentle observation, I've seen this before and I'm not participating this time. You don't try to change them, you just stop pretending you. When they belittle your intelligence, you respond, it's interesting how often you need to do that. I wonder what it's covering. When they boast about their new achievements to provoke envy, you calmly say, sounds like you needed that to feel secure today. When they play the victim after causing chaos, you note, you seem more invested in appearances than in actual reconciliation. And then you leave the conversation. No need to elaborate, no need to plead, no need to clarify. Your words land not like accusations, but like revelations. Reminders of what they already know deep down, that you see them and they can no longer hide behind the performance. It is in this space, this sacred, emotionally sober space, that the narcissist begins to lose grip, because they thrive on confusion, they thrive on your emotional investment. But truth is not emotional, it's surgical. It cuts through performance with precision. It reveals without aggression, and that's what they cannot stand. You may wonder, but won't this just enrage them? Possibly, but that is not your concern. You are not reflecting the truth to punish. You are reflecting it to protect. You are no longer contorting yourself to preserve their comfort. You are no longer dimming your awareness to avoid their rage. You are no longer lying to yourself for the sake of keeping the peace. You are speaking the truth softly but unshakably because your healing depends on it. And the beauty is, the more you speak this kind of truth, the less you feel the need to say anything at all. You begin to realize that your silence, once rooted in fear, has become anchored in understanding. You see the manipulations coming from miles away. You watch them perform their old tricks, but your heart no longer moves, and in that stillness something beautiful begins to rise. Peace. Not the shallow peace of avoidance, but the deep peace of no longer needing to lie to yourself. This truth doesn't just expose the narcissist. It restores your integrity. It clears the fog. It rebuilds your ability to trust your instincts. You remember that your perceptions were never the problem, their projections were. You begin to trust your voice again, and slowly you come back to yourself. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Courage, dear heart, And perhaps there is no greater courage than learning to see someone clearly and still choosing peace over performance. When you speak the truth without venom, you remind yourself and the world that you are no longer available for emotional games. You are no longer auditioning for their approval. You have stepped into a different realm now, where clarity is more valuable than closeness, and truth is more important than tension. And this clarity leads you to the next level of transformation, where you no longer just expose the narcissist. You become someone they can no longer grasp, no matter how hard they try. 3. Becoming the fog, when you refuse to be defined by their distorted narrative. There comes a point in every survivor's journey where the most urgent question is no longer, why did they hurt me? But why did I believe them when they said it was my fault? And that's where the deeper work begins. Because to escape a narcissist is not only to remove their presence from your life, it is to untangle their voice from your identity. It is to dismantle the distorted mirror they held in front of you, the one that told you that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too broken, too difficult to love. You lived under those labels for so long, they started to sound like truth. And that is the most devastating part of narcissistic abuse. Not just what they did to you, but what they convinced you to do to yourself. They rewrote your story in real time. They projected their flaws onto you until you accepted them as your own. They reduced your complexity into caricature, labeling your empathy as weakness, your boundaries as betrayal, your intelligence as arrogance, and little by little you stopped recognizing the person in the mirror. Not because you changed, but because they wouldn't let you be fully seen. That's why this third tactic is so powerful, because it teaches you how to become something they can no longer define. It's called becoming the fog, and it's not about hiding or being evasive. It's about reclaiming your right to define yourself on your own terms. It's about becoming emotionally untouchable, not through avoidance, but through maturity. Narcissists need to box you in to control you. They need you labeled, predictable, emotionally pinned down. Because if they can define you, they can disarm you. But when you become like fog, soft yet ungraspable, present yet beyond their reach, their entire strategy begins to crumble. This tactic is not about being dishonest. In fact, it is built entirely on truth, just not the truth they want to hear. When they say, "You're always so sensitive," you reply, "Maybe I am. Sensitivity is part of how I love deeply." When they say, "You overreact to everything," you calmly respond, "That's your perspective. I see it differently." No defensiveness, no explanation, just firm, quiet self-definition. And that right there is the fog. Not because you are unclear, but because you no longer let them define the clarity. Imagine trying to grab fog with your bare hands. No matter how tightly you squeeze, nothing stays. That's exactly what happens when you refuse to argue inside their framework. You don't reject their insults with rage, you let them evaporate. You don't try to prove them wrong, you let their projection float right past you, unanswered and unvalidated. This is deeply frustrating for a narcissist, because they live to trigger you, to sculpt your identity through confrontation. But when you disengage emotionally while standing in your own truth, you become something they cannot categorize and therefore cannot control. And slowly the narrative begins to shift, not in their mouth, but in your mind. You start to realize that their definitions of you were never about you. Their accusations were reflections of their own internal chaos. Their criticism was not feedback, it was projection. You were never too much. You were simply with someone who was not enough to hold space for your wholeness. So, you stop defending yourself, you stop arguing over who you are, you begin to say things like, I know who I am, and I don't need to prove it to you. You're entitled to your perspective, but I live by mine. You no longer get to narrate my story. These are not just statements, they are boundary lines, they are declarations of sovereignty. And the more you say them, the more your nervous system begins to calm. You no longer feel the need to react, explain, or fix. You become anchored in yourself, and they no longer hold the anchor rope. This transformation is not easy. It requires emotional discipline. It requires grieving the version of you that lived for their approval. It means confronting the fear that if you stop performing for their acceptance, you might lose them. And then realizing with great peace that losing them is actually how you find yourself. Becoming the fog is not weakness, it is quiet strength. It is not running away. It is rising above. It is what happens when you finally understand that you are not here to be interpreted. You are here to be authentic. You are here to live in alignment with who God created you to be. And it is in this fog, this holy ambiguity, that you begin to see the outline of your true self re-emerging. Not the self they tried to shape, but the self that was never meant to be controlled. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "You are never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream." And I say to you now, you are never too late to redefine yourself, to reclaim your name, to resurrect the version of you that never needed validation from someone who couldn't see past their own emptiness. And when you become that fog, calm, clear, and untouchable, you are ready for the next step. Because now, with your emotional clarity restored, you must learn to protect your sacred space from ever being infiltrated again. And that leads us directly to the fourth transformation. Limiting their access to your life. Not out of spite, but out of sacred necessity. 4. Limited exposure. Guarding the sacred territory of your soul. At some point in your healing, you will come to understand a truth that shifts everything. Not everyone deserves access to you. It's a simple sentence, but it changes the way you breathe. Because for so long you believed that love meant openness, that faith meant forgiveness without boundaries, that kindness meant keeping the door unlocked, even for those who came only to steal your peace. You were taught to give, to serve, to endure. And in a world that often confuses sacrifice with self-erasure, you became easy to reach and even easier to exploit. But now you know better. Now you understand that what is sacred must be guarded, and that includes you, your time, your energy, your inner world. That includes your joy, your healing, your voice. The fourth tactic, limited exposure, is not about punishing the narcissist. It is about honoring yourself. It is about recognizing that someone who consistently violates your spirit has lost the privilege of being close to it. Limited exposure means drawing a firm line, not with anger, but with conviction. It means no longer being emotionally available to someone who uses access as a weapon. It is not about cutting people off dramatically. It is about letting them find a seat in the outer court of your life, far from the sanctuary where your soul now resides. The narcissist craves access, not because they want to know you, but because they want to use what they know against you. They interrogate not to understand, but to collect ammunition. They ask how you're doing, not because they care, but because they're mapping your vulnerabilities. Every detail you give them becomes another string they try to pull, another door they try to open. So you stop giving them keys. You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to lie. You simply begin to protect your inner life. When they ask how you are, you say, I'm doing what I need to do. When they pry into your relationships, your future, your fears, you offer nothing more than polite, surface-level responses. You say less. You share less. You give nothing of depth, because what they're really looking for is fuel. Emotional intimacy they can manipulate. Realness they can distort. Sincerity they can shame. And when you stop giving it, they begin to starve. Imagine a castle with walls that were once wide open to the world. Anyone could walk in, touch the artifacts, rearrange the furniture. That was you. But now you've rebuilt the gate, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Not everyone is allowed inside. Some may stand at the edge and wave. Others may call your name from the hill. But only the trustworthy, the kind, the consistent, only those who love without exploitation are permitted entry. Limited exposure is not avoidance, it's discernment. It's no longer granting unrestricted access to someone who misuses proximity. It's understanding that some people need to be kept at a distance for your soul to survive. This tactic doesn't always mean going no contact, especially if the narcissist is a family member, a co-parent, or a long-standing connection. But it does mean that contact must now happen on your terms. You control the timing. You control the content. You decide what they get to know, when they get to know it, and how you respond. And this is what terrifies them. Not your silence, but your sovereignty. Because narcissists cannot manipulate what they cannot reach. They cannot twist what they do not know. They cannot dominate what no longer leans in. And every time you limit their access, you reinforce the truth that they are no longer the center of your emotional universe. You begin to feel lighter. You sleep better. Conversations no longer feel like landmines. You stop rehearsing what to say. You stop bracing for impact. You move through life without flinching. This is the fruit of limited exposure, not detachment, but deliverance. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body." And if that is true, then the care of your soul is not a suggestion, it is a sacred responsibility. You are not selfish for protecting yourself from those who exploit your vulnerability. You are obedient to something higher, the call to live in truth, in peace, and in the light of God's love. And here's the miracle. The more you restrict what the narcissist can access, the more you rediscover what they tried to erase. Your laughter returns, your clarity sharpens, your confidence regrows. Your voice, once silenced by fear, begins to rise with strength. And it is with that voice, healed, grounded, and no longer afraid, that you now begin to speak a new story. A story where your life no longer revolves around their chaos. A story where you are no longer the supporting role in their fantasy, but the protagonist of your own restoration. Which leads us into the final and most transformative step, where the narcissist no longer defines your reality, not even from a distance, because they are no longer relevant in the world you are rebuilding. 5. The parallel mirror, when your wholeness becomes their silence. What truly breaks a narcissist is not your revenge, your confrontation, or even your departure. It is your peace. It is the way you rise in quiet strength, the way you build a life they no longer recognize, a joy they no longer influence, and a version of you they can no longer reach. The final and most powerful tactic is what I call the parallel mirror, a living, breathing reflection not of who they are, but of who they will never be able to become. This mirror is not made of glass, but of your resilience. It reflects not their flaws, but your flourishing. And to a narcissist, nothing is more threatening than your life moving forward without them in it. In the early stages of healing, most survivors crave closure, an apology, an explanation, an acknowledgement. But in time you learn that the truest closure is not something they give you, it's something you become. You become the evidence that you didn't need their love to be whole, that you didn't need their validation to matter, and that you didn't need their presence to be strong. This is the cruelty they never expect, not your bitterness, but your irreversible becoming. When they try to provoke jealousy with their new relationship, you smile genuinely, not as a performance, but from a place of deep-rooted indifference. When they flaunt success, you no longer feel the impulse to measure your worth against theirs. When they reach out with manipulation disguised as warmth, you see it clearly and let it pass like wind through a field. You no longer react because you no longer revolve around them. And what they see now, what they cannot unsee, is your joy, your stillness, your wholeness. It taunts them, not because it was designed to, but because it proves the lie they told themselves, that you would crumble without them. You didn't crumble. You became someone new. The parallel mirror is not something you hold up, it is something you live. It is found in your healthy friendships, your laughter, your still nights of peace. It is found in the purpose you've reclaimed, the boundaries you now honor, the truth you no longer betray. It is in the way you wake up without anxiety, walk without shame, speak without shrinking. And yes, it is also in the way you bless them silently, wishing them no harm, needing no revenge. Because you no longer carry their poison in your bloodstream. You've been cleansed by grief and reborn in grace. When you live this way, not in reaction but in resurrection, the narcissist begins to feel something they cannot process, irrelevance. Not because you forced it upon them, but because you reclaimed your life. And to someone whose entire existence depends on being central, your indifference is louder than any confrontation could ever be, T.L. Lewis once said. Getting over a painful experience is much like crossing monkey bars. You have to let go at some point in order to move forward. That's what the parallel mirror represents, the moment when you finally let go, not out of despair, but out of deep, radiant resolve. You no longer need their downfall to feel powerful. You no longer crave their regret to feel seen. You have built a new life. Not in the shadow of what they did to you, but in the light of what God is now doing within you. So let the narcissists spin their stories. Let them romanticize the past or vilify your absence. Let them perform. You are no longer in the audience. You are no longer on the stage. You've walked out of the theater and into the sunlight. And that is the cruelest freedom of all. Because you didn't just escape, you healed.